The first time the word mommy echoed through the glass-walled boardroom, the room froze so hard it felt like the air itself shattered. 30 executives sat mid-breath, stock charts glowing on the screen, contracts half-signed, when a small voice, soft, trusting, completely unafraid, cut through the power and polish like a blade through silk. "Mommy, Daddy said you'd be here." The CEO of Hartwell Industries, Eleanor Hartwell herself, didn't blink at first. She couldn't. Her pen hover of a billion-dollar merger, her signature halfway between ink and legacy, while every eye in the room snapped from the child clutching a worn stuffed rabbit to her. Eleanor Hartwell had no children, no spouse, no personal life to speak of. And yet this little girl, standing in scuffed shoes and a yellow dress 2 sizes too big, was looking at her like she was home. The man who rushed in behind the child looked like he'd run a mile with his lungs on fire. Daniel Cole, junior logistics manager, widower, single father, felt his heart slam into his ribs as he realized exactly where his daughter had wandered. He dropped to one knee instantly, voice shaking as he reached for her. "Lily, sweetheart, I told you to wait outside. This isn't." But Eleanor raised a hand before he could finish, not out of authority but instinct. Something about the way the child said mommy had reached into a locked place inside her chest and turned a key she thought had been lost decades ago. She stood slowly, heels clicking against the marble floor, and asked the question that would unravel all of them. Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was a fracture beneath it. "Why?" she said, eyes never leaving the girl's face. "Does your daughter call me mommy?" The room waited. Daniel felt the weight of it pressed down on him, the fear of losing his job, the humiliation of being exposed, the terror of what the truth might cost him, but none of that mattered as much as Lily's small hand tightening around his sleeve. He swallowed, forcing himself to stand. "Because," he said quietly, "the last time she saw a woman who smiled at her the way you did was the last day her real mother was alive." The words landed heavy, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just raw truth spilling out because there was no room left to hold it in. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't smiled at the child, not consciously. And yet Lily had seen something in her that even Eleanor had long forgotten how to recognize. Daniel explained, his voice threading memory and pain together as the boardroom dissolved around them. 3 years ago, his wife had died in a car accident after months of illness had already drained their world of color. Lily was 4 then. Too young to understand death but old enough to feel absence like a wound that never stopped bleeding. In the months that followed, Lily began pointing at women in grocery stores, parks, passing strangers, asking softly if they were her mommy. Daniel learned to redirect gently, to smile through the ache, to cry only after Lily fell asleep. Then one afternoon, during a company family day he hadn't planned to attend, Lily saw Eleanor Hartwell across the courtyard, laughing briefly with an intern, sunlight catching her hair, and something in Lily's face changed. "She looks like she won't leave," Lily had whispered. From that day on, whenever Daniel spoke of work, Lily asked if mommy would be there. Eleanor felt something dangerous rise behind her eyes. She had built an empire on discipline, on emotional restraint, on the firm belief that vulnerability was a liability. She had grown up in a house where affection was rationed and expectations were law, where her own mother had been present in body but absent in every way that mattered. Eleanor learned that love was unreliable, but control, that was something you could keep. And yet here stood a child who had assigned her a role she had never auditioned for, never wanted, never believed she deserved. The boardroom felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in with unspoken judgments and curiosities. Eleanor waved them all away. "Meeting adjourned," she said, voice steady but low. "Now." When the room finally emptied, leaving only the 3 of them and the hum of a city far below, Eleanor knelt in front of Lily, ignoring the crease it would leave in her tailored suit. "I'm not your mommy," she said gently, honestly. Lily tilted her head, studying Eleanor's face with the seriousness only children possess. "I know," she replied, "but you feel like one." Daniel closed his eyes, shame and gratitude tangling painfully in his chest. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever told her she felt like anything than intimidating, distant, untouchable. And yet Lily smiled, soft and certain, as if this truth needed no permission. Outside, the city roared on, unaware that in a quiet boardroom, something fragile and irreversible had begun. Eleanor Hartwell rose slowly, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. CEO, Titan woman who had never bugged mommy before today, and for the first time in years, she felt afraid not of losing control, but of what might happen if she didn't let it go. Eleanor Hartwell had spent her life mastering exits, knowing when to leave a conversation, a room, a relationship before it demanded something she could not give, but this time, she didn't move. She stood there, the echo of Lily's voice still ringing in her ears. Watching the child kneel on the carpet tracing invisible shapes with her finger, utterly unbothered by the gravity she had just dropped into the room. Daniel hovered nearby, rigid with embarrassment, his shoulders drawn tight like a man bracing for impact. Eleanor could see it in him, the practiced tension of someone who had learned to expect doors to close the moment he became inconvenient. She surprised herself by speaking first. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice softer than she remembered it ever being in this building. Daniel looked up sharply, disbelief flickering across his face. He had expected reprimand, maybe even termination. Compassion was not a language he associated with the woman whose name sat engraved on every wall. She gestured toward the window, not as an order, but an invitation. "Sit," she said. Lily didn't wait for permission, she climbed onto one of the oversized leather chairs, curling her legs beneath her like she belonged there. Eleanor noticed the way Daniel hesitated before sitting, as if even the furniture was too expensive for him to touch. That small observation unsettled her more than she liked. This man worked for her company. His life, his exhaustion, his quiet grief, she had never thought about any of it until now, and that realization burned. Eleanor asked questions slowly, deliberately, not like a CEO extracting data, but like someone afraid that if she rushed, the moment would vanish. Daniel spoke in long, careful sentences, describing mornings that began before dawn, Lily's school lunches packed with notes he pretended were from both of them. The nights when Lily would wake up crying because she dreamed her mother had come home and left again. Each word pulled something tight inside Eleanor's chest, something she hadn't exercised in years. Then Lily asked a question that cracked the air open. "Why don't you have kids?" Eleanor turned toward her unprepared. No boardroom had ever asked her that. No journalist, no rival, no investor. She considered deflecting, the way she always did, but something in Lily's expectant gaze stripped the armor from her reflexes. "Because," Eleanor said slowly, "I was afraid I'd be bad at it." Lily frowned, considering this deeply. "Daddy's bad at some stuff too," she said. "He burns toast, but he's still my daddy." Daniel let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. Eleanor felt the sting behind her eyes again and this time didn't fight it. The simplicity of the logic dismant of carefully constructed excuses in seconds. What Eleanor didn't say, what she hadn't said to anyone in decades, was that she had once wanted children desperately. In her early 30s, before Hartwell Industries consumed her every waking hour, she had imagined bedtime stories and scraped knees and sticky fingers. But love had demanded compromise, and compromise felt too much like surrender. When the relationship that might have given her a family collapsed under the weight of her ambition, Eleanor chose certainty instead. She chose work. She told herself that loneliness was a small price to pay for power. Now, watching Lily swing her legs and hum to herself, Eleanor wondered when exactly she had stopped believing she deserved both. The moment ended too soon. An assistant knocked hesitant, reminding Eleanor of another meeting waiting downstairs. Reality crept back in sharp and inconvenient. Daniel stood immediately. "We should go," he said, already retreating into himself. Eleanor surprised him again. "No," she said, then softened it. "I mean not like this." She turned to Lily. "Would you like to visit my office sometime? It has a better view." Lily's face lit up like she'd been invited into a castle. Daniel opened his mouth to refuse, out of politeness, out of fear. But Eleanor met his eyes with something firm and unyielding. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity, it was choice. As they walked out together, Eleanor noticed the way employees stared, not at her, but at Lily holding her hand, tiny fingers wrapped around hers with absolute trust. Whispers followed. Rumors sparked instantly, she knew. The CEO with a child, with a man no one had ever noticed before. Eleanor should have felt threatened. Instead, she felt strangely steady, like something unbalanced had finally found its center. She watched Daniel carefully. The way he kept glancing at Lily as if to confirm she was still there, still real. She recognized that look. It was the look of someone who knew how quickly everything could be taken away. That evening, after they left, Eleanor returned to the empty boardroom alone. The contracts lay unsigned. The city lights blinked like distant stars. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the urge to finish what she had started. She picked up Lily's stuffed rabbit, forgotten on the chair, and held it longer than necessary. Something irreversible had happened that day. Something that would not fit neatly into quarterly reports or public statements. Eleanor Hartwell, the woman who had built her life on control, had been chosen, by accident, by innocence, by a child who believed feelings mattered more than facts. And somewhere deep inside, Eleanor realized she didn't want to give that back. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her penthouse apartment, the city humming below like a restless conscience, Lily's voice replaying in her mind with unnerving clarity. "You feel like one." The words refused to fade. Echoing through memories Eleanor had long sealed away, of a childhood bedroom that never felt warm, of a mother who measured love in performance and silence, of learning far too young that being needed was conditional. Eleanor had spent years convincing herself that she was complete as she was, that the absence she felt was simply the cost of greatness. Yet now, holding that forgotten stuffed rabbit earlier had stirred something dangerously tender. It frightened her how easily the image of Lily's smile unraveled the armor she had spent decades forging. The next morning, Eleanor did something she hadn't done since her 20s. She arrived at the office early for a reason that had nothing to do with work. She asked her assistant to find Daniel Cole's schedule and quietly cleared an hour. When Daniel arrived with Lily, visibly confused by the invitation, Eleanor noticed the way his eyes scanned the office as if expecting the illusion to break. Lily, however, ran straight to the window, pressing her hands against the glass and gasping at the height. Eleanor watched them, father and daughter silhouetted against the skyline, and felt an ache she could no longer deny. This wasn't pity, this wasn't curiosity. This was connection, and connection, she knew, changed things. They talked again more easily this time. Daniel relaxed just enough to share the stories he usually kept buried. The way Lily insisted on setting an extra place at the table, just in case. The school events where other parents paired off while he stood alone. The quiet guilt of knowing no amount of love could replace what she'd lost. Eleanor listened without interruption, absorbing every word. For once, she wasn't thinking about solutions or strategies. She was simply present. Lily climbed onto Eleanor's lap unprompted, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and Eleanor felt her body tense before slowly, cautiously relaxing. She hadn't been touched like this innocently, without expectation, in years. Then Daniel said something that shifted the air between them. "I should apologize," he murmured. "For yesterday. I never meant to drag you into our mess." Eleanor shook her head, her voice firm. "This isn't a mess," she replied. "This is life. And I've spent a long time pretending I didn't have one." The honesty startled even her. Daniel looked at her differently then, not as a boss, not as a symbol of authority, but as a woman who carried her own quiet wounds. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt seen not as a problem to manage, but as a person worthy of care. Over the following weeks, their meetings became routine, small at first, almost accidental. Eleanor began scheduling her lunch breaks around Lily's school hours. She learned Lily's favorite color, the reason she hated thunderstorms, the way she spoke to her stuffed rabbit as if it could answer back. And slowly, Eleanor began to change too. She smiled more, lingered longer, allowed herself moments of softness she had once dismissed as weakness. The office noticed. Whispers turned into speculation. Articles hinted a mysterious shift. In the famously unapproachable CEO, Eleanor ignored them all. For the first time, public perception felt less important than private truth. But kindness, Eleanor learned, was not without consequence. One afternoon, a senior board member confronted her, thinly veiled concern masking judgment. "You're blurring lines," he warned. "Personal entanglements with employees are dangerous." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "So is forgetting our humanity," she replied coolly. The tension that followed was unmistakable. Eleanor knew this path would cost her something: respect, control, maybe even her position. And yet, when Lily ran into her office later that day, arms outstretched, calling her name with that same trusting certainty, Eleanor realized she had already chosen. The real test came unexpectedly. Lily fell ill one night. A high fever that sent Daniel into a panic he hadn't felt since the hospital room where he'd lost his wife. He called Eleanor without thinking, voice breaking as he explained. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She left a gala mid-speech, ignoring the flash of cameras and stunned faces, and went straight to the hospital. Sitting beside Lily's bed, holding her small hand as machines beeped steadily, Eleanor felt something settle into place. This wasn't fear anymore. This was responsibility, the kind that bound you not by obligation but by love. When Lily finally opened her eyes and whispered, "Mummy." Again, Eleanor didn't correct her. She couldn't, not this time. Instead, she squeezed Lily's hand and stayed, all night listening to the steady rhythm of a child breathing, aware, with breathtaking clarity, that her life had split into a before and an after. And she had no desire to go back. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear, the kind that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. Eleanor sat rigid in the plastic chair beside Lily's bed, her jacket folded neatly on her lap like a habit she couldn't quite abandon, even now. Daniel paced near the window, running his hands through his hair over and over, the exhaustion in his movements betraying how long he had been holding himself together by sheer will. When the doctor finally returned with reassurance, just a severe infection, caught early enough, the relief hit Daniel so hard his knees nearly buckled. Eleanor felt it too. Though hers came wrapped in something heavier, the realization that the thought of losing this child had terrified her more than any business collapse ever had. After that night, there was no pretending this was temporary. Lily recovered quickly, but the bond forged in the sterile glow of hospital lights lingered with an intensity that startled them all. Eleanor found herself calling to check in at odd hours, sending Lily books and small toys she pretended were office leftovers, and quietly adjusting company policies to allow more flexible hours for parents. Daniel noticed the changes immediately, not just the corporate ones, but the personal. Eleanor laughed now, a sound that surprised even her. She listened more than she spoke. And when Lily ran into her arms after school, Eleanor stopped correcting the word mommy altogether. But kindness has a way of attracting scrutiny, especially when it disrupts established hierarchies. Rumors exploded when paparazzi photos surfaced of Eleanor leaving a pediatric clinic with Daniel and Lily. Headlines questioned her judgment, her professionalism, her motives. The board called an emergency meeting. Eleanor walked into that room with her head held high, though her hands trembled slightly. For the first time, she didn't rehearse a defense. She spoke from the place Lily had awakened inside her. I have spent my life building something profitable, she told them. Now I am building something meaningful. If that threatens this company, then perhaps the company needs to grow. Silence followed, uncomfortable, charged. Some members looked away. Others nodded slowly as if remembering their own forgotten priorities. The backlash wasn't just professional. Daniel struggled too, wrestling with guilt and fear. He worried about confusing Lily, about leaning too heavily on Eleanor, about the quiet hope growing in his chest that terrified him more than loneliness ever had. One evening, after Lily fell asleep clutching Eleanor's hand, Daniel finally voiced it. What if she gets hurt? He asked softly. What if this doesn't last? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She stared at Lily's peaceful face, then met Daniel's eyes. Everything ends, she said. That doesn't mean it isn't worth beginning. The certainty in her voice steadied him, even as it exposed how deeply she had committed. The turning point came at Lily's school. Mother's Day approached, and Lily's teacher hesitated before pulling Daniel aside. We didn't know how to handle this, she admitted. Lily had insisted on making 2 cards, one for her mommy in heaven, and one for this mommy. The school asked Eleanor if she would attend the celebration. Eleanor stood in the doorway of that small classroom days later, surrounded by paper hearts and finger-painted flowers. Her throat tightening as Lily ran toward her, waving a card covered in uneven letters. When Lily read it aloud, thanking Eleanor for staying, for listening, for loving her even when she cried, Eleanor broke. She cried openly, unashamed, holding that child as if the world had finally given her permission to feel. That moment changed everything. Eleanor stopped living in halves. She invited Daniel and Lily into her home, slowly, respectfully, aware of the gravity of what she was offering. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was partnership, shared dinners, quiet evenings, laughter echoing in rooms that had once known only solitude. The public watched closely. Some criticized, others admired. Eleanor didn't care. She had discovered something more powerful than reputation. Purpose. Late one night after Lily fell asleep between them on the couch, Daniel turned to Eleanor, voice barely above a whisper. She calls you mommy, he said. But what does that mean to you? Eleanor looked at Lily, then back at Daniel. It means, she replied, that someone trusts me with their heart. And I intend to honor that. In that quiet confession lay the truth both of them had been avoiding. This wasn't charity. This wasn't coincidence. This was family, formed not by blood, but by choice. The word family settled into Eleanor's life with a weight and warmth she hadn't anticipated, changing the rhythm of her days in subtle but irreversible ways. Mornings now began not with market reports, but with Lily's sleepy knock on her bedroom door, the soft patting of feet, the question of what breakfast meant today. Eleanor learned how to braid hair badly, how to pack lunches that weren't perfectly balanced but were made with care, how to sit on the floor and listen to long, winding stories that went nowhere and somehow mattered more than any agenda she'd ever followed. Daniel watched this transformation with quiet awe and lingering fear, because he knew how easily the world could take good things away, and he was terrified of watching Lily lose another mother, no matter how unconventional this one was. The tension came to a head when Lily asked the question Daniel had been dreading. They were sitting at the kitchen table one evening, Eleanor reviewing documents while Lily colored beside her, when Lily looked up suddenly and asked, "Can I keep her?" The innocence of the phrasing shattered Daniel. Eleanor froze, the pen slipping from her fingers. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked carefully. Lily shrugged. "Other mommies stay forever," she said. "I want this one to stay too." The room went still. Daniel felt panic claw at his chest. This was the moment he'd feared, the line between comfort and permanence blurring into something too big to ignore. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel finally said what he'd been holding back for months. "I can't let her get hurt again," he said, voice tight with emotion. "If this ends, if you decide this is too much, she won't understand. I won't either." Eleanor listened, her face unreadable, but her hands trembled in her lap. "I don't do things halfway," she replied slowly. "I never have. I just didn't know how to do this at all until now." She admitted her fears then, of failing Lily, of being exposed, of losing control and discovering she wasn't enough. The confession stripped her of every title she'd ever worn, leaving only the woman beneath them all. The world tested that vulnerability almost immediately. A scandal erupted at Hartwell Industries, fabricated allegations fueled by rivals eager to exploit Eleanor's softened image. The board pressured her to step back, to refocus, to prove she hadn't lost her edge. Eleanor stood at the crossroads of everything she'd built and everything she'd found. In a press conference watched by millions, she made her choice. She didn't deny her relationship with Lily. She didn't apologize for it either. "Strength," she said into the cameras, "is not the absence of love. It's the courage to stand by it." The fallout was swift, but so was the support. Employees, parents, even investors rallied behind her. The narrative shifted. Eleanor Hartwell was no longer just a CEO, she was human. Through it all, Lily remained blissfully unaware of the stakes, measuring life in hugs and bedtime stories and the simple certainty that she was loved. One evening, as Eleanor tucked her in, Lily asked softly, "Will you be my mommy forever?" Eleanor felt the weight of the promise press against her chest, heavy and sacred. She didn't rush the answer. "Forever isn't a word I can promise lightly," she said. "But I can promise to choose you, every day." Lily smiled, content with that truth, and drifted to sleep. Daniel watched from the doorway, tears blurring his vision. In that moment, he understood that love wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about honoring it by continuing to show up. Eleanor hadn't erased Lily's mother, she had expanded the space where love could live, and in doing so, she had healed something in all of them. The question that had once frozen a boardroom now returned in a very different way, softened by time, love, and the quiet courage of choosing one another every day. It came not from a shocked executive, but from Lily herself, standing between Eleanor and Daniel in the sunlit living room, her small hands wrapped around both of theirs. "So are we really a family now?" she asked, eyes wide with hope. Eleanor felt the moment stretch, the past and present folding into each other, the woman who had once believed love was a liability, and the child who had taught her it was a responsibility worth everything. Daniel squeezed Eleanor's hand, not to pressure her, but to remind her she wasn't alone in the answer. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice steady and sure. "We are." The word settled into the room like a promise finally kept. Lily laughed, a bright, unrestrained sound, and threw her arms around both of them. In that embrace, Eleanor understood the full meaning of what Lily had seen in her that first day, not perfection, not certainty, but the willingness to stay. The willingness to choose kindness even when it terrified you. Months later, the story came full circle in a courtroom far quieter than the boardroom where it had begun. Eleanor stood beside Daniel as a judge read the final decision, Lily sitting between them swinging her legs, blissfully unaware of the legal language reshaping her world. When the adoption was finalized, Lily looked up at Eleanor and whispered, "You didn't leave." Eleanor knelt, tears streaming freely now, and held her daughter, because that was what Lily was, in every way that mattered, and whispered back, "I never will." The headlines that followed told a different kind of success story, not about profits or power, but about transformation. Eleanor Hartwell continued to lead her company, but she led differently now, with empathy, with understanding, with the knowledge that greatness measured only in numbers was hollow. Hartwell Industries flourished in ways no analyst had predicted, because its leader had learned the most important lesson of all: kindness multiplies. At home, life wasn't perfect, and it never pretended to be. There were arguments, mistakes, long days, and lingering grief for a woman who would always be part of Lily's story. Eleanor made space for that grief, honoring it instead of competing with it. She told Lily stories about her first mother, preserving her memory as a foundation, not a shadow. Daniel watched this with a love deeper than romance, rooted in respect and gratitude. Together, they built something honest. Years later, Lily would stand on a stage at her graduation, scanning the crowd until her eyes found Eleanor and Daniel. She would smile the same way she had that first day in the boardroom, certain, unafraid. Eleanor would clap, heart full, knowing that the greatest title she had ever earned wasn't CEO or visionary, or leader, but mommy. And it all began with a single question that left a powerful woman speechless, and a single act of kindness that changed everything.